Hey, all you wiretappers, Gary Jenkins back here in the studio of Gangland Wire, retired Kansas City Police Intelligence Unit detective, and I investigated the Mafia, and I'm still working on the Mafia, only we work on Mafia history now. And I have a kind of unusual, different sort of story today. I have a man who has been doing cartoons based on real mob stories, but he has his own little cartoon characters. It's called Dust Bunny Mafia. If you're on my Gangland Wire podcast group, you might have seen that, and he's on other places in social media. So welcome, Brett Juliano. Welcome, Brett.
Thanks, Gary. Thanks for having me on.
All right, cool. Guys, I'm just going to give you a little taste of what this looks like. It's when I first saw it, that's interesting. I appreciate a different way of doing these kinds of things. All right, that should be. There you go. All right, there you go. There's which one was that? That was the Sicilian flu. Brett, tell the guys a little bit about what got you into this, and then we'll talk about each one of these images that you sent me.
Yeah. So I've been doing comics and the Dust Bunny Mafia for over a dozen years. Long story short, I wanted to be a animator when I was young, and then as I grew up, I always loved the idea of telling stories through visual form. And then after moving out to Chicago about 10 years ago, I really wanted to connect with bring some of the local history of the Chicago underworld and retell it through my Dust Bunny Mafia comics. I try and do it in a way in which I try to break the myths of Hollywood and a lot of things. I try and get my research through primary sources. So I'll listen to true crime podcasts like yours. I have a huge collection at home of true crime books, looking through FBI files, court transcripts, things like that. And I just want to find ways to compose those things into three-panel comics that kind of address myths and other aspects of the mafia.
So I know you came to the MobCon out in Las Vegas and had a whole display of different things. So you even have a whole little book too, don't you? Or you've got one or more books that are a little bit longer than just one three-panel.
Yes. Yeah, I've got with the Dust Bunny Mafia comic overall, I've done about 10 books total. I've
Okay.
got three big graphic novel trade collections, and then as you're aware, the little based on a true story booklets, like these ones, like where these strips come in. I now am collecting that into a larger anthology collection that's going to
Okay.
be a 132 page full color that has over 200, shooting about 230 individual strips with the
All right.
commentary.
Do you have a website, or how do people get hold of you if they'd want to get some of this?
Yeah, you can find me comics.dustbunnymafia.com or dustbunnymafia.bigcartel is the online store, and I ship everything out myself. I've done a bunch of crowdfunding campaigns, over 20 of them, and I've shipped all over the world with my comics. And basically, search Dust Bunny Mafia. I'm on, like you mentioned earlier, a lot of the Facebook groups. I'm on Instagram, Threads, X, all the social platforms.
And guys, I'll have a link to his website in the show notes. Brett, tell us a little bit about this one. This is or I've got the Sicilian flu. Tell us about this story here. What's the real story here?
So that strip is based on an interview with Joaquin Garcia, excuse me, who
Hmm.
was known as Jack. And he was interviewed, I believe, on the Before the Lights podcast with Tommy
Yeah.
Canale. And he was telling a story about Greg De Palma going to court one day. And while he was being deposed and brought in for questioning, basically it's addressing the myth of the actions and the over exaggerations that mobsters will do to tie things up or misdirect. So he was talking about how the wise guys will be out eating and drinking, partying at night or on the weekends, and then they'll come to court in a wheelchair, maybe have a blanket. Some of them will even have a little oxygen tank, and just the absurdity of the lengths they will go to try and misdirect or halt things up.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, that's a common kind of deal. That more not just mobsters do that. There's other criminals have done that too. I've seen that myself. So let's talk about two is Luck Be a Lady. Get that one up there. All right. What's the story with Luck Be a Lady?
So, Luck Be a Lady is talking about the myth of Charles Lucky Luciano's nickname of Lucky, and
Okay.
about how it was one night, one kidnapping that where he got the scar, and the people dragged him into Staten Island. They beat him overnight, tortured him, set him free, and then that's how it was that one event is what made him or gave him the nickname Lucky. When in actuality, what I'm parodying here is that he's trying to impress girls in my comic. And with each drink and stuff, he adds more myth and more legend to the nickname. And I believe the event happened. I'm not trying to discredit that. I just think and I've seen sources say that he had the nickname long before the
Mm.
beating and like the one night event. And it wasn't that instance that gave him the nickname Lucky.
Interesting. I never thought about that. What I always thought, I think he reported that himself in that book that he wrote with another author. I think that's where that story came from. I'm not sure. But I always figured he probably had some coppers tuned him up, but he had to make it into a much better story and make himself much tougher.
Yeah, of course.
They would do that back in those days. They tune your ass up bad. All right. Let's see. Now we got, oh, I know this one. Show me the way.
So this one is based on your account.
Yeah.
That's so it's talking about Carl Tuffy de Luna's home being searched after Valentine's Day or around Valentine's Day in 1979, where the Kansas City Department and the FBI executed a search warrant on his house. And so I set it up very cordial, in which my detectives are being served coffee, uh, and then the line that I loved most from the book was basically where he's like, all right, you might as well come into the basement. That's where you'll find the good stuff. And he's leading them around the property and everything, saying, if you want to find this, here's where you're going to get this, almost like it was a art collector or
Yeah.
someone's showing off a house. And so it's one of those instances where the truth is stranger than fiction. And so I
Yeah.
like, once I saw that, I'm like, okay, I can translate this into a comic and reach a broader audience.
Yeah, really. Yeah, I'll never forget. He tells his wife, says, Sandy said, fix these officers a pot of coffee. So she was busily making coffee, and he would follow him around a little bit and point stuff out. They'd come up from downstairs. They brought two or three guns from upstairs, downstairs. Hey, Tough, where'd you get this? And then it was getting like midnight or something. And it was like, we're going to be there. And we were there in the end, almost till 4 in the morning. And it's one agent, Shay Airy, he's dead now, but he was a long-time mob investigator. It goes back to when they first formed the Top Hoodlum Squad in Kansas City. And so he knew Tuffy pretty well. They were familiar with each other. And finally, Tuffy said, Shay, might as well come on downstairs. That's where the good stuff is. I remember thinking, oh my God. And that's where they found all the notes that he'd been keeping. See, he knew that was good stuff. He knew the importance of those notes and a little additional story on those notes. The next day or two, he's meeting with some of these other guys with Joe Ragusa and Charlie Mortina in a restaurant, and they've got a bug on this table where they're at. And he said, here's what he says. He says, I got caught with a bunch of shit. He said, I had it all in a bag and I was going to throw it away. But man, I just didn't get to the trash in time and I didn't get it thrown away. He wasn't going to throw it away. He was just one of these guys that kept everything. And that bunch of shit that he was talking about were those notes, the infamous notes. All right, let's see here. Yeah, I'll try. This is on account of rain. Okay, there we go. So this is on account of rain. So tell me the story on this one. I'm not sure.
So this comes from a local myth about Portland, Oregon. And so I've got my Bugsy Siegel, Ben Siegel character, and then he's meeting with Al Winters, who was
Hmm.
the local boss of kind of crime boss in the area. And apparently the story set goes that Ben Siegel visited him and he spent 2 weeks in Portland trying to find a way for them to work together to open up a gambling casino or something. And the over the 2 weeks, it didn't rain. It didn't stop raining. Every single day that Bugsy was there, it didn't it didn't let up. And so the idea is that we don't have any real good accounts on whether this did or didn't happen. There's very little known about the Portland crime family and those things. There's only a couple books been written as far as my knowledge. But it's just playing with the fact that the Pacific Northwest and Portland is rainy for a
Yeah.
long time. And a mobster who's more affiliated with Hollywood and Las Vegas and the sunny Southern California, Portland would be a nightmare.
Yeah, really. Yeah, yeah. And you must have talked to Casey McBride on that one, our friend Casey McBride from Portland, and because he's talked a lot about Al Winter, and he was like I think started during Prohibition and the crime boss of Portland. If you think of Portland having a crime boss, and it would make sense if he was going to do anything outside of Portland, and even if it was making any money, why Bugsy Siegel, he felt like he was a West Coast boss, I got a feeling. And anything that happened on the West Coast, and he heard about it, he probably would be coming around wanting to get a little piece of that action. That's how they are. They hear you're getting some kind of criminal action that's organized and steady and regular. They're going to come around and try to get a piece of it. So I would imagine that's what he was up there doing. And there's no doubt Al Winter was the erstwhile crime boss. We had a guy ended up in Kansas City, came through Kansas City. He had a relative here named Joe Augusto who ended up in Las Vegas, but he went to Portland for a while. He was, and he was a Sicilian, and he had different scams going. We'd never heard of him when he appeared in Las Vegas, but he ended up catching a case up there in either Washington State or Oregon. I can't remember which one now, for some kind of a scam he was running. He came back down and he got in with the people at the Tropicana, and Joe Augusto somehow, I know how he did it. He was connected to Nick Savella here in Kansas City, and he parlayed that connection with the people that owned the Tropicana. There were several partners in that, and they wanted a big loan to amp up the Tropicana to keep up with the other expansion of the other casinos, and they need to get this big loan. It's hard to get loans for casinos. Regular banks back then, regular banks would not make loans, but the Teamsters Union would, and so he parlayed his connection with Nick Savella, promising that they would get a big Teamsters loan, and then Nick Savella made sure they didn't get it for a while as he kept working his way in and getting more employees that owed him into places, and then they started to skim. And that's a little Kansas City connection to the northwest part of the United States.
Yeah.
Interesting. Tell us a little more about it. What do you got planned now? You're putting those little three panel true crime ones into. Will you organize it by family, or how will you do that?
Yeah, so the collection's called Family Business, an offer you can't refuse, and it's going to be crowdfunded via Kickstarter starting on March 24th and run through mid-April. I expect the book to be then available for public demand in June or July of this year, because it takes a little time to print everything. But yeah, I've got it organized roughly into like geographic areas. So I start with Chicago, and then for the most part, will go chronologically. So I'll find the strips about Johnny Torrio and Al Capone, and then move up through the years until you're talking about Giancana, Antonia Cardo, and things like that. And then I'll hit each of the kind of the big regions. So I've got everything from Chicago and the Midwest, and then I'll go down to Cincinnati and hit things and Newport, Kentucky during Prohibition, where George Remus and some of the Cleveland syndicate started gambling dens and things like that. And then I move into New York and do the same thing. But I've been working on these comics this is the 7th year that I've been doing these true story comics. So I'm going to have over 230, 235 in this collection. And then each comic has a little blurb, a small paragraph explaining the true life story that inspired the comics. And so throughout the book, it's going to be 2 to 4 comics on a page or in a spread. And then there's going to be different kind of segues in between, in which I'll have some of the graphic design work that I've done to parody mafia businesses like Galante Cigars, based on
Oh yeah.
Carmine Galante if he had a cigar shop. And I'll do things like that. And so I'll have like little interludes or kind of chapter breaks between different stories, in which I'll also explain give some context for the casual true crime fans.
And you had T-shirts with cigar shops and different things like that too, don't you?
Yep.
Yeah, you had
So,
those made up for as gifts or what as rewards for your crowdsourcing thing. Because I think I've
yes.
got one of those Dante cigar shop T-shirts, or I used to. It's around here somewhere. I don't know. Like sometimes I run through T-shirts. I get so many, and I just start getting rid of them and starting over again.
Oh yeah, I try and get one for each of the campaigns that I run. And when I do that, I've now got a huge stack and I'm like,
Yeah,
and it's
yeah,
just because I want to test the quality, make sure I have
yeah.
good product for my backers. And then I'm like, I don't really need another t-shirt, but I'm gonna
Yeah.
offer them.
I first started in this first movie. I made up a whole bunch of T-shirts. I bought 300 T-shirts at Gangland Wire, and I think this is 8 or 9 years later, and I'm down to one or two left of the original T-shirts. Then I discovered print on demand, that Printful that you told me about, and so now I just print them. I get one done at a time, and,
Yep.
for my Gangland Wire, and I don't really try to do any other T-shirts. I don't know. It's sometimes it's like you just get so spread so thin doing different things that I run out of time myself.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
now, are these books, or are they just the graphic novels? Are they just available off your website, or do you have some of them up on Amazon or places like
Yeah,
that?
so Meet the Family, my first Dust Bunny Mafia graphic novel, is on Amazon. And then the rest of them are on my website or on
Okay,
Kickstarter when I have the campaigns going. I'll usually
okay,
have different add-ons that people can pledge for to get all the books or the different like mobster playing cards that I've done, things like that.
interesting, interesting. All right. Brett Juliano, I really appreciate you coming on here, and we will get this up. And guys, if you're interested in this, get hold of old Brett. I'll have the contact information. He'll be glad to ship you out some stuff. And he needs. I appreciate anybody that does. He does. Brett does everything. Characters are not real, but the stories are real. So I appreciate anybody that bases anything on the real stories, because there's so much myth out there and so much bullshit so I appreciate that you do that, Brett.
Thank you, Gary. That means a lot.
Okay. All right, Brett. Good talking to you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Okay. All right, Brett. I don't know, next week or two, maybe I'll go ahead and slide this up there.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it.
I'll send you a link whenever I get it up there.
Sounds great. Thanks, Gary.
Okay. All right. Bye.
Bye.